G'day, guys, and welcome back to the Daily Discomfort Podcast. This is episode number 8. We have our first guest speaker on the podcast with Andy, who is a provisional psychologist who specializes in men's mental health. We're going to be talking, obviously, about mental health today with a few different topics and some practical takeaways. Andy, would you just like to introduce yourself, what you do, and maybe how you got into men's mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to be here. I'm a provisional psychologist. I'm doing my master's of clinical psychology at the minute, which I'll finish at the end of this year. As we just spoke about off air, I have a background in physical training, being a personal trainer. I have a real appreciation for how the mind and the body interact and how we can use fitness and physical movement to improve our well-being as well. In terms of what got me focused, I guess, on men's mental health is, first of all, my own lived experience. So I've had my own struggles along the way with anxiety and with panic and these sorts of things. And I think in the beginning, it was kind of observing the shame that I was feeling, and kind of how I would try and balance, being a guy, but then also not being able to do what I thought was simple tasks and things that I should have. And that kind of started the ball rolling of trying to figure out more things about myself and then kind of relating that to the people around me. Um, I also think that part of my training and qualifications, sometimes in class, it did feel like the male mental health aspect of things wasn't really um, it didn't really resonate with me as a guy, and I thought that um, this is maybe an area that we need to improve on. And then just in myself kind of moving on to like social media and kind of trying to seek out some voices that I could look up to and model my own life off of, it was pretty clear that where there's a shortage of I think credible and balanced speakers in the field of kind of male mental health, and that kind of male influencer, the ones that speak to young men. I think that there's a lot of good in those messages, but also a lot of bad. So I think that we could do a bit in this space to make it a bit more balanced and a little bit more evidence based and these sorts of things. So I thought, why not? If I want to see that change eventually, why not kind of try and contribute and see if I can be someone along the way that others can get some reliable information from. So that's where we're at.
That's awesome, mate. Thank you for sharing that. I was actually going to just touch on like a couple of points there. One being, and before we move on to the next topic, when you look at, I guess, the influence of, I guess males' mindset, motivation, and all that sort of stuff across like Instagram and YouTube now. I've seen this as well. There seems to be this one party where it's, I don't know if you'd call it hyper masculine that's sending a certain message. And I guess that seems to be the one where it takes guys away from maybe actually accepting that they're emotional beings and that it's okay to have all these things, and not just labeling themselves as weak for having that sort of stuff. But do you kind of, I guess you would agree in the sense that there is that other side of the camp where some of these guys who may be in that boat and they already have a hard time accepting that they do have emotions and they know they do need to be able to process them, and understand them, and then I guess integrate that into their life, they can be kind of scared off by the other side of the camp where it's just like, hey man, open up, like tell us how you're feeling. It's okay to cry. Like for someone who's not used to doing that at all or ever crying in front of people, it's obviously going to be quite intimidating. So I guess how do you think we do draw a balance between the two, or how do you intend to personally create that balance?
Yeah, and I think masculinity is such an important and integral part of a man's life that we shouldn't be trying to get rid of. I do think that masculinity can sometimes be conflated with uh, insecurity in many ways, and I think that there's a lot of I think that message can become one and the same. And so I think even when we talk about things, I'll talk about the other side first, which is the toxic masculinity messaging around social media. And I think, unfortunately, what's happened in that space is these two concepts of masculinity and insecurity have become one and the same. You can actually be a very masculine, confident man and not project insecurity. But if those two things become muddled, then it can appear as quite a toxic thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that masculinity is what is toxic. It's the stuff around that. So that's kind of one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum, the Andrew Tate of the world, for example, which is to lean into your masculinity. Now, there's so much of that message which is incredibly helpful and resonates so well, and it's why he's gotten such a good following. Things like being disciplined, striving for success, putting in your hard work. All of these things are action oriented, which is what males prefer to hear in therapeutic contexts. Um, and a lot of these things, what make them very what I think resonates with a lot of guys is that they're under your control. You can decide how much hard work you put in. You can decide how much discipline you put into your craft. You decide how much you work on things. Where I think sometimes it goes astray is these other messages that get added into it. For example, this whole kind of like lone wolf mentality, or this complete self-reliance, or put two birds up to the world and say F you, and you finally get that nice car and you can show them that you're the boss. The problem is that we know that um, self-isolation is the biggest predictor for severe male depression. We know that you have a much higher rate, a 32% higher rate of early mortality if you're self-isolated. So unfortunately, where all of the good parts of the message come in, it just gets kind of infected and modeled by all of this stuff that's actually quite harmful advice. So I'm trying to be a voice, and I'm quite a small one at this point, that can kind of balance those two things. And that's what I was talking about in the beginning. I think we're missing that balance of going, lean into that masculinity, lean into those traits that makes you a healthy, thriving male, the discipline, the hard work, the competitive nature that you have. But as soon as it sways into things that we know can really harm you mentally and emotionally, let's not do those things.
Yeah. I love that you bring up that lone wolf mentality. A lot of people talk about this concept called the lonely chapter. I think it was Alex Hormozy talked about it, then Chris Williamson on their podcast. And it's an interesting one because in my own perspective, I feel like there is times where you need to be able to isolate yourself. And in light of what we actually had last week, which was Loneliness Awareness Week, in that podcast that I discussed that topic, I was kind of explaining how I think it's okay to have isolation in the sense that you're doing it in respect for yourself and in love for yourself, because you need some time on your own and you need to have a good solid relationship with yourself, that you don't always feel like you need to thrive off the energy of others, or you feel disconnected even when you are hanging out with other people, right? Like, people can have loneliness, but it doesn't actually mean that they're on their own. I think there was actually a video or podcast I was listening to where they said there was research that actually didn't correlate people who had loneliness to simply being alone. A lot of the people, or 50% or something, were quite social and they were just disconnected, and maybe their values didn't align
Yes.
with the groups around them and whatnot. But yeah, on that topic of, being the lone wolf, or maybe going to the monk mode, like, where do you think you draw the line with how much time you actually need to spend on your own as a guy? Maybe if you've just gone through, the classic male arc where it's like they come out of the breakup and then it's all gym, it's all self development, and they're pushing everyone away. Because I've done this and I've seen other guys do it where they go into lone wolf mode, they're in the gym and they're just blasting music and they feel like they're working on themselves, but they are just isolating themselves more and more. And to coming from someone who probably spent a lot of time doing that in the past, and you can still see it going on, there's no sort of like awareness or little awareness on that topic, I think, for a lot of guys out there because of the people that they're listening to, because their bias is only towards listening to the Andrew Tates, all these like super hyper masculine characters, which, like you said, have great messaging. Some of the messaging in it is incredible, but there's that side of it that's quite polarizing and says, oh, it's not okay to have this part of yourself included. So yeah, I love that you brought that up there. But where do you think you can kind of draw the line as a guy, or even teach guys to have that level of awareness to be able to take it with a grain of salt and go, hey, I'm going to use this side of it. I've been a bit slack. I do need a bit more discipline. I do need to build a bit more grit or toughness. But on the other side of things, I don't like what they're saying here. I actually need to work on my emotions more because that's a problem for me.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really good talking points. I think there's probably not research in such a specific niche of that. What's a healthy amount of kind of isolation or time away from others? But what I would say personally, tying things together, I think what matters more about the time you spend away from others is the intention behind that. And the picture that I painted before is a person that is kind of channeling that anger and projecting that onto other people rather than finding healthy ways to get that out. And so um that I can see ending in a very toxic um journey for that person, that they're not actually learning to become socially connected because their negative emotions are the ones that's stopping them from doing that. If we paint another picture of the person that is seeking to become a better companion to themselves, is seeking to actually sit with their thoughts and emotions more, trying to be spend time away from others so that they can actually learn to work through their thoughts, to not instantly go to their devices. That's actually very helpful. That's a form of not leaning into that avoidance and that distraction, these other strategies that we know can actually harm us as well if we try and run away from our emotions, or like you say, being fully dependent on another human being or another group of human beings to feel good. We're not actually dealing with what's inside. So I think while both of those things can look the same from the outside, the reason why you're doing it and the intention that you're bringing at it is probably the thing that would change how healthy it ends up for you, I would say personally.
That's a great answer. Yeah. I think a lot of guys will benefit from maybe gaining a bit more insight like into that topic. I was actually, as soon as you said there's not really research on what the perfect balance is, you would know previously working as a personal trainer with every individual, it's kind of a matter of like if and when, right? Like it's so individual, based on their own constraints, their own capacity and abilities, where they're at in their life. So it's like how long's a piece of string, I guess would be the other question there.
So,
We kind of, I guess we've fast forwarded a little bit into what could be, I guess, the men's mental health crisis. One thing that I didn't want to skip past, even though you introduced how personally you've gotten into psychology and the interest in men's mental health, what was it that you saw around you? Like maybe around mates, family, other male figures in your life, and maybe just what you saw out there through your studies when it came to males that gave you the desire to be someone that could facilitate or educate or coach them on how to manage their mental and emotional well-being better.
I think for me, like that journey kind of started much before uni even. Like I just happened to be the guy at school that would want to talk to people about, like, would want to skip the small talk, would want to talk about people's relationships or what they thought their purpose was and their meaning was. And in a lot of ways I thought I was the weird one. I probably was, but I just, yeah, I didn't really resonate with just talking about cars and footy all the time. I just, as soon as someone kind of brought up a personal matter or something that they wanted to get off their chest, I would be that person to be like, let's talk it through. Let's try and work through this. And so I don't know. I think kind of intrinsically, it's just been a natural part of me and my interests. And I think I can either try and suppress that or to fully lean into it. I don't think I ever kind of um, decided that, hey, this is the thing that I want to do, and especially working with males is the thing that I want to do. It kind of just happened naturally. And then I think, like, to tie back to what I said in kind of the context of me being at university, I think that a lot of the examples, the strategies, the even just as simple as like the metaphors that you use, as someone that I wouldn't say is the most masculine male, but I identify with the masculinity aspect of my being. I don't think I really resonated with those messaging very much, and I thought, you know, I think that anyone else that was like me, or maybe even more masculine as well, there were just many times where I found myself really kind of being missed. Like the message was going over my head, and I thought, well, this is going to happen the same for any other guy that's in the therapy office, in my opinion, anyway. And so I thought, well, I'm right in that target demographic that I want to be helping. The target demographic of 15 to 44-year-old males, and their biggest predictor of death is suicide, or the biggest cause of death rather is suicide between 15 and 44. I sit right in that category. So I think it's helpful having that position to be like, well, what would I want to hear? I'm right in this group of fellas, but I also want to be the voice speaking to myself in a lot of ways. And so in that classroom environment, I could hear what I like, what I don't like, and now I have the opportunity to kind of spread that out to other people too.
Yeah. I love it, man. And it's really relatable to the sense, like when you say, not being the most, not being the typical macho guy, the typical masculine guy, it seems like there's this, I guess, apprehensiveness to actually be someone who's a bit more balanced. Like someone, they want to go all in, all out. It's like, I'm either going to be the guy who's super masculine. I'm not going to talk about my feelings. I'm not going to show weakness, all these things. And then you get the guy who is super open and just wants to talk about it all. And like, no one wants to really draw a middle ground. With the Daily Discomfort Run Club, which I brought up earlier, I think that was always the idea, is like, there may be guys who come into it that maybe need to just chat a little bit more, or need the breath work, need to be able to sit in stillness a little bit and not always feel driven to be productive and having to go work and having to go train. But then there's also the guys that might need a bit of a kick up the butt, and it's like, hey, like we got to start to push you a little bit more here. You love doing your breath work or meditating and journaling all the time, but maybe we do need to actually build a bit more toughness. I don't want to say toughness, just like build a bit more physicality into it, or push with your career a little bit more too. I did have another great thought before in response to what you said, but that has escaped me now. So I think what we'll start to
That's
move
okay.
into is what we're basically talking about now. I think a lot of it aligns with creating about a balance, and obviously changing the narrative around, I guess, what it means to be a man. But when it comes to men's mental health, is that it doesn't just mean that you have to sit down in a room and talk to everyone and open up about your feelings. Or when it comes to being masculine, it doesn't mean that you need to be a seven-figure entrepreneur who's also like an MMA fighter, or you can do a 300 kilo deadlift in the gym, right? Like, we're not just going for these extremes off both ends. So, can we just dive into a little bit from your own perspective, where we currently sit in the men's mental health landscape? Maybe if you've got any stats that we should be aware of, any interesting research that you know of, and maybe what needs to change for men who are maybe more on the more feminine side, men who are on the more masculine side, to start to be drawn into actually embracing how they can improve their mental well-being, but also, I guess, embody being a more grounded masculine man. If that sounds actually like a chat GPT thing to say, embodied grounded masculine man, but we'll work with that for now.
I get it. I think the problem is twofold. I think that we're seeing that many males delay help seeking. So that's the first part of it. 1 in 4 guys delay help seeking. And the second part is we're not resonating with them in primary healthcare. So they are dropping out really early and very frequently out of that care. So the first point being delaying help seeking. The research communicates pretty clearly that males compared to females are not as good at being internally aware of problems. Their problem perception is much lower. And so there comes this need to improve guys' ability to actually pick up on symptoms when they come about before they reach that crisis point. And so that's what we see is like a lot of guys will wait until the crisis has happened, then they find themselves in care, and then they drop out early. So there is this kind of early screening, early detection need that we need to get better at. And the second part being that a lot of guys will leave therapy, and if you read the Movember reports, a lot of them report that they just didn't feel understood. They didn't feel like the clinician was speaking to them or really spoke their language. Now we know that on average, guys don't prefer that clinical language. They prefer a lot more relatable, real life talk, not that therapy speak. We know that, as you mentioned before, they prefer the shoulder to shoulder rather than the face to face. So, if you are going to talk to a guy or have them in care, it can feel like quite a spotlight when the person's in front of you and saying, open up, talk to me right away. How can we even just change the setting of the room or the focus so that it's not purely on the guy? And that's another thing. Guys prefer when the caregiver actually opens up about themselves, shares some self-disclosure. So there's lots of little things that come up in the research that I think are pretty clear, and we have enough weight behind that can actually make a real difference. I just don't think that's come out or been included into primary health care yet. Because I think that there is a bit of a misnomer when it comes to what the research says about men's mental health. I think that there's this belief that men don't seek help, but that's not actually true. About 91% of guys in Australia, at least, have reported that they have reached out to primary health care, but they just don't stay there very long, or they delay help getting that help in the first place. And so they are reaching out, they are eventually getting there, but they're not staying there very long. So what can we do to try and improve their time in care and the effectiveness of those outcomes? And I think a lot of it simply comes down to speaking their language, being action oriented when you speak, avoiding that clinical language, and just kind of finding these ways that can resonate best with them.
Yeah. Okay. There's one thing that stood out there when you said standing shoulder to shoulder. And another thing was, I guess, not having like the clinical lingo. Like, I guess saying words that and talking about mental health that would make a guy feel like he's not a test subject, but maybe feel a little bit alienated. But when it comes to standing shoulder to shoulder, that's one thing I'm interested in. Even if you look at like men's group, men's circles, things like that, what are your thoughts and opinions on them? And if there's any considerations we need to make about it, or why they are beneficial for guys?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that men's groups have been tested, and that's quite a helpful thing for a lot of guys. I think it ties back to what you said before about um, there's not going to be one size fits all in any of these solutions, and I think that's another thing too. Is guys on average prefer when treatment and therapy and care is collaborative, and that they have the choice and control. So that's when, so when we're referring a guy off to help, whether we're a clinician or we're a friend, a mate, a loved one, if you kind of force them down to like down one option, say you have to go speak to a professional, or you have to go use this helpline, or you have to go and do this, versus saying here's an informal option of care, like a men's support group, or here's a professional, or here's a run club, whatever it may be. Once they have that choice and control, normally their engagement with it is much better. And so, it's kind of a long way of saying I think that for a lot of guys, that informal men's group is very helpful. Whereas it's just not going to resonate with other guys that feel like they need to do something completely different. In terms of why I think a men's support group is most helpful, is it targets that stigma right on its head. And stigma comes about from not kind of computing that other people are going through the exact same thing as you, and they're showing the bravery to actually open up about that. you can see that firsthand in that group of fellas around you when you go to a men's group. So I think that's the power in it. Is it kind of it lets you know that we're all on the same journey here. The downs that you're experiencing, I'm experiencing too. And so you should feel free, you should feel confident to share that with the rest of the group. But that's also not saying that men's groups work for every single man that's out there.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. On that note, when you say, someone kind of sets the scene, right? Like someone opens up, presents a problem or challenge that they're having in their life or some sort of opinion on their own mental health and well-being. This makes me, it reminds me of something that we actually studied in university. So we had like one or two psychology units in an exercise science degree. And one of the
Mm,
things that they talked about was
sure.
self determination theory. And I think the three factors influencing this, and this is when it came to, behavioral changes when it came to exercise and diet. But there are three fundamental things. One was relatedness, one was connectedness, and the other one was autonomy. So it sounds like what you're basically saying there when you look in that sort of group setting, you've got, relatability, like relating to other people's problems. You're probably connecting on a deeper level with other people as a result. But what you have also mentioned is autonomy. Like, as a guy, I want to know I've got some say in what I'm doing. I don't want to just be told what to do. I think if we are to make the assumption, like the majority of guys out there would like to know that they're self led. They would like to know that they're the one that is guiding their decisions and they don't want to feel like that they're being pushed or shoved into a funnel. And even at times, they might like to feel like an individual. Maybe like they may not want to be put into a specific box. They're like, hey, that's not me. Like this is me. Can we collaborate on this, as you've said? And maybe this solution will work for me a little bit better. It's interesting, just the correlation there. Out of like, I don't know, the majority of things that I remembered from university, there's like a handful that stuck with me, and that was one of them.
Yeah.
That it's really interesting to see. I think, given your background in health and fitness as well, one thing that I'm really interested in learning and sharing with the listeners of the podcast is how does fitness influence mental health and well-being?
I think many different ways. I think you could look at it from the psychological aspect first, which is I think it builds first and foremost resilience to lean into discomfort and to know that you can actually come out from the other side. I think like from a neurochemistry standpoint that we know that you get great gains in serotonin, the drugs in your brain related to feeling good and having longevity, even just mentally. Um, I just I think you know on that you can have this uh, neurochemical called brain derived neurotrophic factor that can be released when you do high intense exercise. And this is very helpful for learning. I think that there are more kind of nuanced benefits to physical exercise that aren't really out there in mainstream knowledge. But and just personally speaking, exercise for me has been one of the biggest healthy coping strategies or things that I can rely on to feel good in life's ups and downs. And so I think that I think that more and more research is coming out that when it comes to things like depression, anxiety, exercise can be just as effective, if not more effective, than antidepressant drugs, for example. It's not to say that one of those options is better than the other. It's completely kind of up to the individual, as we've spoken about before. But I just think that, there's more and more research. You can't really ignore how much physical fitness and physical movement is going to impact your mental health. And I don't think that research is going to slow down anytime, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, it looks like now it's just gonna keep emerging, right? Like, given that the problem seems to be increasing, like we need the research to keep coming as
Right.
well to give us some more information to work with. Um, on that note,
Absolutely.
what was that?
Sorry, I'm just plugging in my laptop. Sorry,
No,
go
you're
ahead.
right, man. On that note, when it comes to information, right? Like, I think an interesting thing when it comes to mental health, like, if we're talking about depression, anxiety, I was actually having a conversation with a client this morning who has ADHD. And I was honestly someone in the same boat where I used to think with ADHD, it was just the answer was like, just focus more. Like, just do your breath work, just
Okay. Yep.
focus, just be disciplined, these sorts of things. And I think when it comes to men's mental health, like, I guess we've got to be careful with the wording around it at times. Like, even looking into mental health this year and actually looking into the definition of it and the difference between mental health versus mental well-being versus mental wellness, and looking at something like depression and what actually characterizes that, from like a clinical interpretation versus someone just saying, oh, I feel depressed. But maybe they are just a bit down and it's just a natural emotion of like, oh, I'm just sad about this here, but it's not like a chronic state. I guess the main question or point I want to bring up is you'll talk to some figures and other male figures, and they're typically that, the Aussie battler, the Aussie fella, and that's going to be the person a lot of the time who's like, ADHD is just a label or depression is just a label. Like, don't seek out your identity just because someone told you that. I guess my viewpoint on it is like use it to guide you. Like if you're someone with ADHD, hey, I've got a tendency to do more and more of this, therefore I need to be aware of that and then manage it with whatever strategies, whether you need to be medicated and whatnot. I think again, people they're like either this side of the fence or on that side. So with some guys, they're like, nah, doesn't exist, don't need it, keep doing what I'm doing. Some people are like, oh, I've got it, and that means that I can't do maybe not anything, but it's like that means like they're kind of playing that victim mentality a little bit more. How do you think we can get education across to people that, anxiety, depression, ADHD, they are a real thing. But just because you have it or just because someone has it, it doesn't mean that they're a victim of it. It just means that they've got to manage it better. They do have to exercise. They do have to look after their sleep, their nutrition. They do need to talk to someone. Maybe they need medication. An interesting way I'd heard this recently, it's like, if someone's got diabetes, you don't just say, "Oh, diabetes isn't a real thing. Don't give them any medication." You medicate them, right? And then you go, "Oh, what else is helpful? Oh, exercise, sleep, nutrition." How do you think we can better educate men when it comes to men's mental health, depression, anxiety, and then even going into other things like ADHD, maybe even autism, that like it's not a label that makes you any less of a man or it doesn't make you a victim and it doesn't mean that you've got to characterize yourself or sorry, identify as whatever this label is. So how do we educate men better?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think what makes this topic tricky is that mental health disorders or diagnoses are not verifiable, and that's tricky because as humans we're very tangible. We like to look and feel and see, and I can put your broken leg through an MRI and know and see exactly what caused it and how it looks like. And so for you to tell me that you have depression, I can't see that. I mean, I can see the behavioral kind of manifestations of that, but I can't see inside your brain. I can't see how your brain is wired differently from mine or how your psyche is different. I have to really trust your words. And that can be, um, some people aren't willing to do that. And, the whole depression doesn't exist is actually a really big message, especially in the male influencer space. And to those people, I say, if you believe that depression doesn't exist, you should be very grateful for the position that you're in. Because once you're in the room with someone that's their life is falling apart and has been from a very young age because of something like depression, you realize that it is something that's very real, and to deny it and to dismiss it is helpful to absolutely no one. And so, just dismissing someone without giving them kind of actionable steps or even just holding space for them to say, look, I'm not completely understanding what you're going through, but I'm going to be here to support you. But let's still try and strive towards reaching those goals that you have, rather than just parking the bus and saying, oh, well, you have this thing, I'm not going to touch it or get anywhere away from it. But all of that's going to be far more helpful to say than it doesn't exist. And I do think ADHD is in a similar boat. I think the general public don't have a huge, haven't got their what am I trying to say here? I think ADHD is a bit more complex and nuanced than what the general public would say it is, which is, I think most people's idea of ADHD is it's the kid kind of falling from the roof in class. And the one that just can't pay attention and can't focus for a millisecond. And like you said, some messaging around that is, oh, you just have to focus better. One of the things about ADHD is it's not actually a deficit of attention. It's not actually it's not like you have a lack of attention. It's a lack of control of your attention. And so that changes everything. Then you have the person that can come up in front of you and say, I don't have ADHD. I'm actually extremely hyper focused when I do this specific task. And it's like, yeah, but can you control that? Can you modulate that attention when it comes to filling out that administration work for your job, or when you have to work on the computer for long periods? I think that's the problem with kind of the TikTok, Instagram influencers speaking about mental health and diagnoses is a lot of these things are a lot more nuanced and complex. And so a lot of people will come into the office and say, I definitely have ADHD because I can't focus, blah, 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 blah. But there's a lot more considerations. And I think the person that we referenced before that's saying ADHD doesn't exist, depression doesn't exist, they're just not in a very good position to have to have an opinion on it.
Yeah.
Personally, is what my opinion is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. It's like, again, being someone that's worked in health and fitness, there's times that you will get guidance or information on health and fitness and how you should train and how you should eat from someone who's never studied the thing. It's purely from anecdotal
Yeah.
experience or what the other gym bros have said. I think on that point too, one thing that I find interesting is that, do you think there are a lot of men out there who maybe just are a little worried, and it can project a little bit of insecurity or fear when they say these things just aren't real, it just doesn't exist? Because there's maybe a fear that, hey, maybe I could be affected by that. If they don't like guys being sad and emotional, they're like actually scared, hey, maybe that's like me. Maybe behind closed doors I am crying, but I don't tell anyone about it. And that's that idea of vulnerability, right? Like that guy doesn't have to go tell everyone that he's crying behind closed doors, or that he struggles to focus and that he potentially may have ADHD, but he's just scared of what people are going to think about him if that's the case.
Yeah, I think possibly 100%. I think that sounds like something that could definitely happen. And I think that, to that point, suppression and avoidance are the two biggest contributors to most mental health disorders and problems that come from them. So it's never really a helpful strategy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, actually, you made me think before too. When it comes to someone's own experience with mental health, with even just opening up and talking about things, it made me think of, an athlete, like someone who's just played sport all their life and they've always been good at sport. And then they meet someone who's just not good at sport and they're
Mm,
like, why don't you just do this? Like, why don't you just lift the weight? Why don't you just kick the ball, when they've had no chance, no opportunity? They just haven't been raised that way to do it. It's like meeting someone with depression or anxiety or ADHD, and it's such a guy thing to do. Why don't you just do it? Why don't you just try harder? Why don't you just be disciplined? It's like, yeah, these are obvious parts of it. And like over time, I think you can build these things too. But it's so alienating to that other person. And something that a lot of guys probably struggle with, myself included at times, is empathy. Like they can't actually put themselves in the person's shoes and go, oh my God, like that would actually be so shit if I didn't have the confidence to go out there and, I don't know, kick a ball or lift a weight in the gym or take their shirt off the beach. Or when it comes to focus and that, they're like, oh, what, you can't sit at a computer for 3 hours straight and just work? Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, great points. Great points. Yeah, exactly.
yeah. I think moving on from this now, what I'd like to get into next is, we've discussed a few things. I think this topic in itself, men's mental health, could this could be a call that goes on for hours. And maybe again in future we can dive deeper into specific topics. But what I'd like to actually provide the audience with
Yeah.
is some practical frameworks that they can use if they are struggling with their with their mental health. But also a question to kind of get that started is, with what you're doing now, or let's say you woke up tomorrow and you said, I'm going to change men's mental health. I'm going to provide a framework for men to work with to actually shift their mental health so they can overcome whatever challenges they're facing and increase their quality of life. What would that framework look like? Like what that would that process look like for a guy who's like, all right, I'm struggling. I'm need to seek out help and I'm going to go see Andy about it.
Oh, I mean, look, this is why we put so much emphasis on the assessment phase of when you actually take in a male or anyone to care, to psychological care. And that process can take 3 hours plus of just learning the person's context. And this is probably one of my messaging when it comes to the influences and being a more balanced speaker in this space is advice without the person's context can be more harmful than it does good. And I was just scrolling through TikTok and Instagram the other day, and just hearing a lot of these coaches, for example, mental health coaches, listen to a guy tell them one thing about them, and then just there's 15 minutes of advice coming from the coach straight after. It makes me cringe inside because as a kind of early career clinician, as someone in the professional space, if you don't understand the person's context so in depth and so well that it becomes almost obvious to you what that person needs to do, that you shouldn't be like, advice giving really isn't the industry that I'm in. It's not about advice. It's about knowing the person's context so well that you kind of give them a guiding hand into the next step. And so yeah, I would definitely hesitate to say what I would tell this man because I don't know anything about them. That being said, I think one of the most important strategies that every person can work on, every guy, every person, is tying themselves back to the present moment. And I'm sure that you would be very familiar with this as being a breathwork coach and that sort of thing. Is if on this spectrum, right, of being from the present moment, from being forward focused, so you're always thinking about what's coming up, we call that worry, and that's very prominent in people with anxiety disorders. Or we can go all the way the other route where we're so focused on our past and our history, we call that rumination, and that's very common in people with depression. We want to sit right in this space as well as we can. And in some modalities, they call that anchoring. I refer to it as anchoring. It's finding a way to return yourself back to the middle ground. Now, the kind of fun, interesting, cool thing is that your anchor, whatever that process is to return you back to the present moment, is your unique thing. No one can actually map that out for you. There's some kind of predictable ways to start or things that you can test and try doing, but an activity of designing your own anchor or finding what it can be that reliably brings you back to the present moment is one of the best um, uses of your time and energy that you can do. The same way that you would grind to get a raise at work or to build a new project or get that Lamborghini. One of my posts is around like what is it? Normalize hustling for your well-being as much as you do about getting rich. You know what I mean? And this is one of them. Like, if you want to spend time and energy into something that can be really fruitful for your well-being, build a strategy for yourself. Now, in terms of what that can look like, think of how can I engage my senses in whatever I'm doing. So normally what happens, even while you're listening to this podcast or you're reading something, your mind is either 1,000 miles in front of you or 1,000 miles behind you. How can you re-engage with the exact experience that you're in? So for example, it might be about finding something that you can squeeze with your hands and asking yourself, is this cold? What's the temperature of this? How's my hand feeling as I do this? It's channeling yourself back into exactly where you're at. And I think a lot of people sometimes misinterpret that, oh, in order for me to be in the present moment, my mind has to be completely silent. And I can't do that. I can't have no thoughts, so there's no point trying. It's actually not about that at all. You could still have 1,000 thoughts in your mind, but let's get those thoughts and experiences about what you're doing in the current moment. What can you smell? What can you see? What can you touch? How hard can you push your feet into the ground while you're in this meeting at work? It's what we can do to kind of get ourselves back in the middle of that spectrum. And I think that this is something that's worthwhile for anyone to do. And then in terms of advice beyond that or information beyond that, you just have to know the person's context very in depth, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. I love the answer, and it's when you bring up the point of coaches, influencers online, you know, spewing out information without knowing someone's individual context. I know like a lot of people now seem to speak in hyperboles when it comes to, that fast, catchy content just because they want to get all the views in there, build up their Instagram, build up the following and whatnot. But one thing that came to mind when you said that, and even with what you would do in a practice, it's like we've got two ears and one mouth for a reason. It's like if you're genuinely trying to help
Oh,
someone, you're
yes.
probably going to be doing more listening than you are talking. And I think a lot of us can, you know, fall a victim, or I wouldn't say fall a victim, can be guilty of just over talking. And typically at guys, like if someone's got a problem, you just kind of talk to them. Here's the solution, bro. Here's the solution. And I think it's good. Like we do want to find solutions at guys, but I think it's also why a lot of men haven't been heard at times. And the first time it happens, like I've seen a few of the guys that have come to the run club, like it's almost like a surprise look. They're like, did we just have like a conversation about that? And I was actually able to give you my, experience with whatever the topic was. No one laughed, like, unless they, actually told a joke. No one laughed, no one judged me, and they're kind of like a bit shook
Yeah.
by it. You're like, yeah, man, that's okay. Like, that's cool. We can have those chats and you can still go build your business. You can still go excel in your career. You can go lift your weights and work for your six pack and whatnot. But you can still have these conversations too. It doesn't make a difference. But yeah, reverting back to that point, and I can be guilty of it at times, and I try to be conscious of it, is when I do just start talking at people and maybe I just haven't listened enough yet. Um, Having a partner at times, having a female partner, I've definitely been called out a couple of times when it's like, babe, I don't want you to tell me what to do. Just listen, right? I'm upset. Just listen. Just be with me. Hold me, whatever. Like, I think that's a big learning curve for a lot of guys is like your missus doesn't just want you to tell her here's what you're doing wrong and here's what you needed to go do to fix it. It's just how their mind works at times, and like they're more connected to their emotions. They want to be able to feel them, have them validated, and then if they ask for it, if they truly ask for it, hey, but like what should I do? What do you think I could do in this context here? But I don't think that's limited to just a male and a female partner. That's any partners, but that's also friends. Like you don't have to just tell your mate, stop being a pussy man, just go do this. It's like, oh, how does that make you feel, dude? Like, what made you bring that
Wow.
up? Has this been going
Yeah.
on for a while?
Or even just give them the option. Say, do you need someone just to listen right now, or do you want me to give my advice? That can be a really simple workaround. Yeah.
Perfect, man. It seems so simple, right? Like it seems so simple, but a lot of guys we haven't like cracked onto it yet. We're only just learning that, or maybe we're still
Yes, I know. I know.
oblivious.
I struggle too.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, that's a really good point to bring up there. Now going more into the frameworks that we can use, you've actually developed something too called the mental pit stop, and that's for guys. So can you dive into that? Like, explain to me what that is, what it means to a guy, and maybe how they can find it.
Yeah, so we brought up two of what I think were big barriers in men's mental health and men getting the care that they need. The first one is kind of that lack of internal problem perception and being aware that I'm actually struggling a bit more than what I'm letting on here or that I'm acknowledging. That's the first point. And one of the other big things is that collaborative choice and control to say I choose what kind of services that I want, whether it's an informal men's group, it's that more professional route, or more like the helplines. And this comes through the research as some very big barriers. And so the mental pit stop is essentially is targeting both of those things head on. It is going to ask you 15 questions. It's just on your phone or computer. It's a questionnaire style of thing. 15 questions related to your overall mental well-being, your drinking consumption, and your sleep. And it will give you an overview, an overall mental pit stop score of how you're doing compared to other people your age, and will alert you whether you're in the green zone, the yellow zone, the orange zone, or the red zone. And it's meant to kind of show you and alert you, if you're not already aware, that things aren't looking too great right now, or here's some cause to act, to build that motivation that you can actually go from here and start seeking support. And the very next page is giving you those options, those referral pathways. That's all in your control as to what route you go down. So that those were two imperative, really important parts for me when designing this. I wanted those two things to be at the forefront. You just go to the www.mentalpitstop.com.au. It's completely free. There's no sign up. I wanted it to be anonymous because obviously if we're trying to tackle things like stigma, then I wouldn't want to ask for people's full name and address and all that sort of thing. So you can go there and get yourself checked. It's 2 to 3 minutes. Just a quick disclaimer: it's not a diagnosis tool. It's not a substitute for going to a professional at all. It's more of thinking of it instead of like a diagnosis and treatment. It's more of a quick evaluation and referral tool. But yeah, it's in its infancy. It hasn't been out very long, but I'm hoping to get it out in front of more people. And I think it would be just a very helpful, quick, rough tool for guys to start getting more in tune with themselves and then actually doing something about it.
Yeah, perfect. So anyone listening, can you repeat that? So it's www.mentalpitstop.com.au.
.com.au.
Perfect.
Yeah, or just type in mental pit stopping in Google Chrome and it will be the first one, I think.
Okay, awesome. And thank you for sharing that. I had a question around that let's just talk about it very briefly. So as I became aware of preceding the podcast, you've done a little bit of research. Now, one of the papers that you did involved AI. So something that's becoming more and more common is people using AI or ChatGPT as their therapist, as their psychologist. I've personally done it. Like I've talked about, challenges I've having with it. I talk about business, and you can have great conversations. There was something that I saw actually on a reel that you had posted somewhat recently, which I feel like would be one of the biggest issues with using something like ChatGPT. It almost seems to confirm your own biases, and it almost just like sugarcoats things for you and seems like you would have to prompt it to actually tell you things that are maybe harshly true at times, or so it doesn't just go, oh, what does he want to hear? So it keeps coming back and using me. How would you approach using ChatGPT or any form of AI if you are using it with that kind of intent in mind? Like you've got some mental health challenges going on and you're kind of using it as your therapist.
I mean, my very quick answer is I probably wouldn't recommend using it as your
Yeah.
therapist. Using it once you have that background knowledge of what you should be targeting or keeping in mind when it comes to things like your mental health, if it's to kind of work through things in between talking to someone, or if you have kind of improved your mental health literacy in the past, you know what you should be talking about or what you should be looking for, then absolutely. I think the harm comes from kind of any person that's not really aware of what mental health can and should look like, going straight to ChatGPT, assuming that it's telling you the truth and what you should be hearing, is dangerous. And I think that it comes from this idea that when we as humans get stuck, it tends to happen in cycles. And cycles only continue if there's reinforcement involved. And so reinforcement can be and that process of reinforcing a particular cycle can be very helpful in terms of, for example, you start going to the gym and you offer yourself a reward to keep that cycle going, you'll keep going to the gym. That's terrific. Sometimes that reinforcement is just looking at yourself in the mirror and you find yourself continuing to go back to the gym, or you're feeling good, for example. An example of that reinforcement going bad is, for example, you you get anxiety when you start going in social situations. So then you stop going into social situations. You feel better when you're at home having Tim Tams by yourself. So that's reinforcing that the next time when you have an opportunity to go to a social situation, you don't do it. And now that's a cycle that you're kind of stuck in. The same thing, unfortunately, can happen with AI that is not going to alert you if it's reinforcing a problematic cycle. And so, one of the papers I've written is about kind of social skills, because if you are someone that social skills doesn't come very naturally to you, and you have a conversation with AI about your specific interest or your life or your work for 45 minutes or 60 minutes, it will do that for you happily, and it will be engaged, and it will be thankful that you're talking to it. At least that's how it's communicating. If you try and do that with another human being, you will not get very far. That person's probably going to disengage. You're probably not going to build a friend out of talking about yourself for
Yeah.
60 minutes. And so that's an example of how AI can actually contribute to harming you by just reinforcing these things that aren't helpful in real life.
That's all right. That's a really good piece of information to know. I would definitely bring to light. Like, there's been times I've had conversations with chat, and maybe it wasn't, in regards to mental health, and I'm kind of aware of the fact that, hey, it's got a bit of a bias. Maybe I prompt it differently, but you can just sit there, and it's like a bit of a dopamine hit each time it answers. Like, you feel like you're uncovering all the answers that you need to know. Yet, 2 hours later, you're back on it asking something similar, or just asking something completely irrelevant. So I think, like any sort of, I don't want to say addictive habits, but it's just like scrolling the phone. You can start to almost use chat as a bit of a I don't know if I'd say self regulating, but self soothing tool. Like, oh, I don't feel well. I'll just talk to chat about it. And then do you actually work on that problem in the real world? Um, how did you actually go about, I'm curious, like the research on that with the papers? Were you just looking at other papers that have gone into the topic, or was there any sort of, I guess, experiment you guys conducted through, was it through the university that you were at?
Right, this was with another researcher outside of the
Yep.
university. That first paper was what we call a letter to
Yep.
the editor, and you send one of those when you think that there's a prominent, important topic that not many people are talking
Mm,
about yet, that you think deserves to be, at the forefront of people's research. So that was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when I think chatbots and AI started to make its way into
yep.
mainstream stuff. Now I'm currently writing a paper, which we don't have the results of yet, but we're comparing people's experiences of using AI as a therapist versus when they've actually spoken to a real clinician, a real mental health professional, and comparing their experiences between the two. So hopefully that will be out at the end of this year or start of next
Yeah,
year.
awesome, man. And when can sorry, where can they find your research? Like, if they actually want to have a look at this paper, is that accessible through your Instagram? Is it online?
I'd say people on here can just kind of DM me. Go to my pages on social media, Andy the Psych, and I'd be happy to forward that on to you. That's probably connected more to my professional
Yeah.
profiles, but I'd be happy to share that with anyone who's
Okay.
curious.
Awesome.
So the only thing we haven't really touched on yet was something that I noticed when I booked in the next 2 to 3 podcasts is that yourself and then two of these other guys are Christians. And one of the guys who's helped me a lot with the Run Club and a few of the other members there, there's a few Christian people in our community. Personally, I'm not religious, but it was quite interesting to see within the community and just noticing, I guess, different character traits around a lot of people who would be deemed, I guess, if we call it successful in their life, they are people of faith, whether it's Christian, whether they're Muslim, whatever religion it may be. How do you feel like, in your own perspective, Christianity, but for anyone out there, faith, or I guess openness to something more, if you want to call it a higher power, however you would communicate that. How has that influenced you on a personal and professional level?
Sure. Well, I'm actually going to take my professional hat off to talk about my faith
Yeah,
and put my personal one on, just because it would be obvious to most, but I think that's important to say that, my beliefs are not, what I would say to a client per se. Um, I deal with a lot of um, pain and suffering, and one of the things that I keep in my head is I believe that the antidote to pain is purpose. And that's not to say that purpose takes away pain, but it gives you a good compass. And I think that I also do a lot of work, not just with other people, but in myself, to build out what my values are, and that can give me a really good guide on how I should handle pain and suffering, what my next step should be, where is direction when life is falling apart, what is the end goal here. And so I think that something like my faith gives me those answers and gives me that compass in times of when life absolutely knocks you down. And yeah, like personally, I think about 2 years ago, I decided to really take my faith seriously. I had been involved in church and Christianity before, but I just, yeah, it's a tricky thing because I don't think I could intellectually convince someone, and nor did I think anyone intellectually convince me. I think it's more of a um, I don't know, more of a heart-based decision in saying, does
mm,
this way of living resonate with me and almost makes sense of my experiences and how pain is still going to be there, but here's this thing of looking towards God and treating other people in a manner that's uplifting and Christ-like. And it doesn't promise to take away your pain. And I think that this is something that resonates so well with me, and especially in what I tell other people, that if you're looking for a magic fix, this isn't it. But in many ways in life, if you're trying to work through psychological pain, there is nothing that can really instantly take that away from you. But if you can find a way to channel that into something purposeful and meaningful, you'll find that you're more focused on that rather than the pain that you're actually carrying. And I think that, yeah, it just, for me, it just fits in with my understanding of myself and the world. And yeah, I do believe it to be true, and I try and act out that way in my life, and it's been very fruitful for me. I've seen the fruits of that. And again, that's not to say that my life has become easy in any regard, but I do think that it fits really well with tackling the question of how do you deal with life's ups and downs.
yeah. I love it. One thing I've got to add is you're very well spoken. You're a way to convey your perspective on an idea, or whatever it is that we're have been chatting about in this podcast is really good. Like, it's going to be very understandable for the viewer. I love what you've
Thank
talked
you.
about there too, because I feel like a lot of people, myself in the past, if someone told me, "Oh, you should be Christian," like, I'm going to be so oppositional. I'm like, don't tell me what to do. Like,
Yeah, sure.
if I'm going to do something, I want to find my own way there. Credit to what you said earlier. Guys want to have autonomy. They
Mm,
want to have
sure.
power, or know they have the power to guide their own decisions. But it's just an interesting observation that I've made. I'm starting to see. I can't say I'll walk into a church anytime soon, but I've definitely got more open-mindedness to it
Mm,
through what I see out there. If anything, for myself, with like work and yoga and that, I'm definitely like a bit more in tune with like some of the teachings that they have there. But in my own perspective, I think any sort of like framework, guidelines, for living a better life and treating yourself and other people better, whatever works for you is the way I see it, right? Like, and we shouldn't make a
mm,
judgment just based on the fact that someone is religious or they aren't. And I love the way that you put it. It doesn't take away suffering. It doesn't take away pain. like, and that's a big part of what we do, like the idea of daily discomfort. There's always going to be some form of pain or discomfort there. How do you manage it? How do you select it in your life? How can you wield it to make sure that you are more resilient, and a better person for the people around you? On that note, I guess the final little quick question of the podcast is,
Yes.
more in line with what you're doing in future. What do you think could be your daily discomfort or daily discomforts moving forward? Like, what are the big challenging tasks in your life at this point, and how is that taking you out of your comfort zone?
Ooh. I think I'm in an interesting spot career-wise. I'm going to wrap up with my master's quite soon, and so kind of transitioning into the workforce, probably going, straight into full-time practice. I think is really going to challenge me. I try and go to the gym 4 to 5 times a week, and more often than not, I'm hating the idea of that while I'm driving there. But I keep it as part of my daily or weekly routine because I know it's uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and truly, I'm yet to regret a workout afterwards when I didn't want to go originally. So I really like that mindset of leaning into discomfort. In fact, on my wall is a message to myself saying, "Go back to discomfort." It's something that I actually try and live by
Yeah.
personally all the time. I think that this is where growth happens. And again, and it ties in so well to what we said about Christianity, about and reducing pain. Like, if that is your goal, to reduce pain, I think that you could have a better goal. And I think that a lot of it is just shifting your focus rather than solving the pain. And I think that's the same with discomfort. And I think that pain can produce a lot of good. And I think one of the questions that I saw, we might wrap up with one more question, shall we?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll ask myself a question. Look at me
Yeah.
putting my podcast hat on. No,
Let's
because
do
I
it.
read, one question that you may have asked about why is so much of the most transformative growth? Why does pain have to kind of be involved in that?
Mm.
And especially when it comes to like mental, overcoming a mental barrier, or like just even having mental health peace. Like, why is that so painful to get to that point, or to get to the other side? And I was going to liken it to physical health, because I know that you're in that space. So I might ask you first, why is it that to build a body or physical health that you want, why does pain have to be involved?
Why does it have to be involved?
I'm taking over the podcast right now. Let's
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. um, I guess a couple of the ways that I look at it, I've never asked myself the question, why does pain have to be involved? I'd also,
Well, why is pain involved in building the body that you want, for example?
I feel like it's just a process of evolution, right? Like when we look at it, it's
Okay.
like stress and adaptation. It's like for us to actually, throughout our own evolution, for us to transform, if you look at any animals in the wild, there's like certain stresses that will dictate, I don't know, whatever mutations or adaptations that happen for them to evolve to another level. Um, to an extent, though, evolution or transformation isn't always positive. Like there's maladaptation too, which is, I
Mm.
think, why you've got to be curious. Like you said earlier in the podcast, am I just running? Am I just training to punish myself, or am I doing it to grow myself? So with my personal experience through physical exercise, I think it was actually from like a Buddhist book, or something from the Dalai Lama, or a quote or podcast one time, and there was just this idea of embracing suffering. And I think knowing that it's probably going to be there, that there's going to be challenge there, I've got to shift my perspective, and then it's developing that growth mindset. I don't, not that I've got to do it, but I get to do it. And also, I think why it's important for men to actually uh, face that pain and utilize it is it does help them to become more resilient. Because, like it or not, you're probably going to get thrown into it at some point, that you're going to have some sort of adversity in your life, that if you haven't built any sort of like mental resilience, or even when it comes to health, like if you don't build a stronger, more resilient body, you're going to crumble when illness comes around. So it's important from that physical aspect, from a psychological aspect. If you're not embracing discomfort, when it comes around, you're going to crumble. You're not going to deal with it well. And
Yeah.
I would like to know, and I think a lot of men would like to know, that if they have a family member or a friend that gets sick or something devastating happens, or if they're in some sort of emergency situation, that they've got something behind them there. Like they've got a little bit of confidence within their own abilities to help other people and not just crumble. I guess that's the way I look at it. And the only other thing I'd say with that is when you do hard things, when you do uncomfortable things, what I've noticed for myself in my past, the worst I feel mentally is when I feel incompetent. When I don't understand something, like on the academia side of things, I struggled with university, but I got through it at the end of it. When I felt incompetent, I was angry. I was so angry, but it's because I was so frustrated myself because I felt incompetent. Through physical activity, through discomfort, through embracing hard things, whether it's lifting, running, doing yoga, like doing MMA, whatever it may be. Once you show yourself competence, I think this gives you a level of confidence that you can do other things in your life. So I know that towards the end doesn't directly answer the question of like, why do you think there has to be pain? I just think there inherently is there, but you can shift your perspective by saying, hey, it's always going to be there. So I'm going to choose how that gets filtered into my life, and I'm going to use it as a catalyst for growth, which is a very cliche thing to say. But
Oh, you know what? I love that answer, and that's my answer as well. I think that it's in some ways it's unanswerable. It was the way that we're either designed, built, evolved. It's
mm,
intrinsic. You know, if we talk about building your biceps, a healthy amount of stress to the biceps will cause those micro tears that will build it back stronger. The proteins can come in, and you're actually much more capable of lifting more weight. We'd say that that's a positive outcome. Too much stress on the biceps, you'll pull a ligament, you'll completely tear the muscle, you'll be out, you won't be able to lift, you won't be able to use that muscle for 6 or 7 weeks. The brain, I think, is a pretty similar organ to the muscles. I think that a healthy amount of stress will release cortisol that we need to be awake and alert, or it will release noradrenaline in the brain, which we need to rewire. And the whole concept of neuroplasticity is dependent on that noradrenaline being there. Too much cortisol, and now you have a very hyperactive fight or flight response. You're hyper aware and hyper reactive. And so I can't answer exactly why that process of needing pain and a good amount of it, a healthy amount of pain or stress is required, but it's just our organs, our body responds very well to it. I think in coming from a psychological well-being standpoint, I think a more important question is, and you touched on it, which is how do I respond to that pain? And I might wrap up with one kind of metaphor example that I like to tell people. But imagine you're walking in an open field, and you're just kind of doing your thing, walking around, and it starts to rain pretty heavy. Now, kind of sucks because when it rains, you're going to get wet and you're going to get cold. And no one really likes either of those things, unless you're one of those people. But most people wouldn't like. That's now an uncomfortable, not fun situation.
yeah.
Now, if you're in that exact same situation, you're in that open field, you're walking along, and the heavy rain starts to come, and you take it upon yourself to try and outrun that rain. You sprint, you take off, you're trying to run away from the rain. You're likely going to fall over. So now you're wet, you're cold, and you're injured. And so that I think really just conveys, it's like you can't get rid of those first two things, the wet and the cold.
Yeah.
If you accept it and you acknowledge that I'm going to take this head on, you can't get rid of that. But you can actually make yourself a lot worse by trying to run away from that pain that's intrinsically there.
Yeah. I love it. I've actually not heard that one before. That's a nice one. Yeah. Yeah. Put that in the coach's pocket for later use. I hope you haven't trademarked that one, mate.
Not yet.
No, that's golden. Mate, I really appreciate your time today. Apologies for the classic technical difficulties here and the timeliness of it. Where can everyone find you? So we've got the Mental Pit Stop. So we know that's at www.mentalpitstop.com.au. You're on Instagram as Andy the Psych.
Yeah, at Andy the Psych on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and I've just started a free newsletter, a digital newsletter, which is around men's mental health, specific tools for men or people with men in their lives that want to learn more. That's the first link on my Instagram and my TikTok. TikTok. So if you go to my page, you click on that, it's completely free.
Yeah.
And that's only just started. So that would be a really helpful thing for people to support and get behind.
Mate, I'm gonna have to subscribe to both the newsletter and your YouTube.
Do it.
I wasn't aware you're on YouTube as well, so
Yeah, do it, please.
yeah. Awesome, mate. Again, thank you for your time. Is there any closing thoughts or anything else that you wanted to add?
No, just really, really cool chat. And I think anytime that someone from more of the physical health perspective, although I know that you involve, some more of those spiritual dynamics, and someone from the mental health field, anytime that we can collaborate and kind of
Yeah.
see eye to eye and share ideas, I think we have to do more of it, definitely. So I've appreciated the chat. Thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you for being on, man. It's a privilege. And to your credit, I think something you said earlier, like kind of being a smaller fish in the bigger pond now, just building up your social media. And that one thing that I haven't said yet is that when it comes to discomfort, there was those reels of you getting out there in public, talking to people in the public eye. I don't think some people understand how uncomfortable that can initially be to put yourself out there in those situations. So honestly, props to you for that. I remember times when I first got on camera, it's a very uncomfortable thing to do. But that's how you create awareness. People want to see you out there in the field because you can sit there in your room talking about things. And I think about this with the podcast and topics I talk about. If I'm not out there in the community doing it, people don't believe it as much. And you can see you've got passion. You're getting out there and you're talking about it. You're making the newsletter. You've got the mental pit stop there. Like you can see how passionate you are about helping men in men's mental health. So I just wanted to give you props for that.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Definitely.
It's all good, man. We'll continue to stay in contact. There's so many other
Absolutely.
topics I'd love to talk to you about, like even just more specifically with AI as a therapist and ADHD and whatnot. So obviously, I hope we can organize that in future under better circumstances with the recording. But I'll let you get to the rest of your day, mate, and I'll chat to you soon.
Awesome, brother. Let me know if you need anything in terms of like putting the podcast together or anything like that.
Yeah, I might actually shoot over. Just if you can send me through like an image for the thumbnail, and we'll get that on there. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Awesome,
Thank you,
Andy.
Michael. Appreciate you, man.
Enjoy, man. Appreciate you too. Have a good day.
You too. Catch up.
See you, mate. Bye.
Bye.